Hey guys, it's Swankivy. I'm back with another installment of Letters to an Asexual. This is number 10. So today, I'm going to be reading you an IM. I'm going to be reading straight from my computer so I don't have to print it out. And I'm saving trees. So what we're going to discuss today is when some people seem to think that love and sex are the same thing, or rather, when they seem to think that sex is actually necessary for romantic love to exist. And this will be a conversation I had quite a while ago, one from the vaults. This was with a friend, and I say friend loosely because we did not really have the same attitude toward life or a lot in common, as you may be able to tell when I get into reading his communications with me. So this was kind of a short-lived relationship, and I don't think you'll blame me for cutting it off after a while. So we're going to start with one of my IMs with him, where he and I were talking about the reasons that I don't like to go out and dance at clubs. And he's one of those people that seems to think that if you're not out at clubs dancing on Friday night, Saturday night, whatever, it means you're not having fun. And this is an attitude that's all too prevalent. I'm going to share with you what happened after we were talking about why I don't like clubs. And I came up with one of the reasons being that I don't like people assuming that I'm there to get hit on. So here's what he said. He said, "So you don't like guys hitting on you?" And I said, "No, I hate that. Clubs are alright if it's a band I like playing, but I'm non-sexual and I don't date." So, let me read you the rest of this. He says, "What do you mean by that? You don't have sex?" And I said, "Right, I don't have any sexual impulses." And he said, "Come on, you can't be serious." And I said, I am. Why would I BS? He said, "Have you ever had sex?" And I said, "No." And then I rambled a bit about what I've tried in that arena and how I didn't care for it up to that point. And I combined that with the fact that I didn't feel any inclination to do it in the first place, so, I decided there was no reason to keep trying to force myself. So he came back with, "Well, you can't make a generalization like that. You probably are not ready, but if you fall in love with someone, you will want to." I said, listen, I'm not making a generalization. I'm saying I don't make a generalization. I don't want sex right now. And that's not true about falling in love always being equated with sex. Sexual impulses do not come as a result of love. Sometimes they do, but I do have love and have no impulses. And he said, "Well, who are you in love with?" And so I gave him, a list of some names of friends that I love. Though I should probably digress here and say I'm not a romantic asexual. A lot of asexual people can nevertheless form romantic relationships, and I did not and do not have romantic relationships with other people, not since I was about 15, and I had my last boyfriend. So, anyway, this guy came back with, "So you have no yearning for them physically?" And I said, "Right, I don't have a physical attraction for them beyond a hug." And he goes, "Okay, how about Brad Pitt?" And I said, "What about him?" And he said, "Do you look at him in a sexual way?" And I said, "No, I told you I don't see people that way. I can recognize beauty, but I don't have any reaction to it other than liking it, meaning I don't get turned on by attractive images, not to mention that I don't think Brad Pitt is an especially hot person." And he says, "I think you need to have the right guy to turn you on." And I said, "You can't make generalizations either, okay? I don't see my lack of sexual attraction to others of the human species as a problem, and it's not a goal for me, one way or the other, to remain single or to overcome my sexlessness. It's just the way I think." He says, "I think you might be tagging something that is common in all people, fears that go along with those feelings, as something else." And I said, "I'm not scared. I just don't have any sexual feelings. It really is that simple. I was not traumatized in any way, nor is this some kind of symbol or something I feel like I have to prove. It's just my personal taste." He says, "I think you are suppressing your feelings. It's a textbook case." And I said, "But you're generalizing now, aren't you?" He says, "Perhaps." I say, there's no reason for me to suppress my feelings. I'm perfectly healthy. I'm also far from unhappy. It's just that when I look at a man or a woman, all I see is a person, a body. There's no reaction except maybe my eyes like them. He says, but I think you have a fear of beauty. And I said, a fear of beauty? You know what? I hate to say it, but you're really wrong about me. He says, were you a cool person in school? And I said, you're making premature assumptions. He says, just entertain me, please. And I said, what do you mean by cool? Do you mean like the in crowd or what? He said, answer, yes. And I said, no, not especially. Why? He said, okay, so now you have matured into a woman. You are very attractive. And I said, I guess people say so. And he said, but you are holding on to some of the aspects of your youth. And I said, I love beauty, but it's not a signal for sex. And he said, yes, it is. I said, what am I holding on to, and where are you deducing that from? Beauty is not a signal for sex. He said, yes, it is. And I said, no. Me being pretty does not mean I want people to have sex with me. He said, no, but it may mean people will want to have sex with you. And I said, yes, of course. It doesn't mean I'm sending that signal. People will want to have sex with me simply because I have a hole in the right place. I know I can't do anything about that. And he says, no, but please, when you see a guy that is attractive to you, you have to feel something. And do keep in mind that girls' sex drives aren't as reactionary as men's. And I said, but they're not attractive to me any more than girls or babies, or even cute animals. I do not have to feel a chemical reaction simply from looking at someone. And he said, okay, have you ever masturbated? And I said, you don't understand. I think you're trying to tell me what I feel and then get me to admit that I feel it. He says, I'm not, but I think you're holding back some feelings. And I said, why do you think that? Where's your evidence? I mean that. I think you're just jumping to conclusions. And he said, okay, so you do have some trauma there, perhaps. And I said, no. Why is it such a problem that I don't have sexual attractions? Why does that bother you so? And he says, yeah, but to declare you're a non-sexual being is such a strong statement. I said, I'm not saying I'm another species. I'm saying, as such, I do not have sexual attraction. And he says, do you ever consider the fact that you're just making excuses for not having sex? And I said, no, I have no excuses except that it does not appeal to me. I've had more than enough offers, so it's not like I'm wanting for partners. I do not have an aversion to people. I have no reason to have any blocks about sex. I simply do not desire it. I don't have to make up excuses. I'm very honest to myself and others. I don't understand why you seem to want to stick me in a category because I'm something you may not have encountered before. A lack of desire does not indicate trauma necessarily. Sometimes a cigar is just a cigar. And he says, because our desires are what inspires our creativity. You seem very creative, so I'm sure you have some lust. And I said, yes, but not a physical lust for sex. And he said, but it stems from the same place. And I said, my passions, and I do have a lot, are not channeled into my physical body. And he said, well, not now. And I said, my lust for creation does not have anything to do with sex. He says, but perhaps, well, someone may make that happen. And I said, yes, perhaps. I'm saying that I don't have just desires for male bodies. He said, someone you will think of nonstop. And I said, but I never ever said that I plan to stay this way my whole life or that I seeked to change. Excuse me, this is really starting to bother me. He said, why? I said, why are you so insistent on trying to prove that one day I will want sex, whether I want it or not? And he said, you obviously wanted to talk about it. You could have said that you hate guys hitting on you at clubs because it's tacky. And I said, that's not why I hate it. I hate it because they expect that I would want them back. As for the fact that I obviously wanted to talk about it, I don't think so. You asked why I didn't like clubs. I gave you the reasons. I'm honest. And he said, I'm sorry I'm so passionate about this. It's just I'm a very sexual person. And I said, that's okay. I never think that's bad, and I wasn't saying it was bad for you, or that I thought badly of you for it, but I personally do not feel that way, that's all. He says, but I have to be honest, I do think it is bad for you. And I said, I don't think so. If I'm happy and I have no physical problems, perhaps my body does not produce enough estrogen or testosterone, but that's okay. I've been to doctors about it, and it's nothing to be concerned over. He says, "Do you think you are denying yourself the most intense physical pleasures?" I said, "Not really. I feel very fulfilled with life so far. If at some time I want sex, I'll get some." And he said, "True. Hope I can help. Just a joke." We are not asexual creatures. You need someone so bad, I can sense it. You want someone to think about you, tell you you have nice eyes, which you do, love you. And I said, "You are so ridiculous." And he said, "No, I'm not. This whole asexual thing, it's just a front, a defense mechanism." And I said, "It is so not, dude. You have no idea what you're talking about. Give it up. You need to think for a second and stop projecting your feelings and needs onto me." He said, "I'm not. I just think you're... Oh, forget it. I just think you're fooling yourself." And I said, "You are. Telling me what you're basing your assumption on. The assumption I'm talking about is that I need a man and I'm putting up an act." And he said, "I just like to be with a girl. It's nothing to do with the completion of myself." And I said, "So this means that I must need it too?" He says, "You can't say that you wouldn't want a guy to just be so into you, to be in love." And I said, "I didn't say that." He says, "Ha ha." I said, "You don't understand anything I say since you're so determined to believe your untrue assumptions about me. Can you listen to me for a second?" He says, "Go on." And I said, "Don't say ha ha. You didn't prove anything, and I didn't admit to anything I didn't already say openly. I'm not looking for a man, and you can't sense that I need someone. It isn't happening, so if you sense it, you are creating it yourself. I've never had a sexual attraction to any person in my life, but I do not profess to know that it will never happen." He says, "Have you ever been in love? And I mean romantically." I said, "Seeing as how my sexual feelings have never reared their heads, I'd say it's a safe assumption to say I probably haven't ever had what you define as romantic love," answering your last question. And he said, "I think maybe you were an odd person in post-secondary schooling, maybe alienated with respect to dating and whatnot, and this whole theory of yours that you're not sexual in any way is just a way to dampening the fact that you weren't part of it all. But now that you're older and a very pretty girl, you haven't shed this insane assumption that you aren't sexual. Open yourself to love. There is a lot of pain involved, but the joy of it all outweighs the pain." And I said, "Ha. Point 1, I did date in high school and was sought after by more than I dated. Point 2, I'm not making an assumption that I'm not sexual. I'm never horny, ever. I realize that's impossible for you to understand, but it is true. And you've made a very grievous error when you assume that I have never had love. I do not need your love advice. You're not advising me to love. You're advising me to have sex. I am currently in love." And he said, "With who?" And I said, "With whom? Excuse me, but must I name them all?" And he said, "Jesus, I'm not talking about friendly love. I'm talking love. Love where your heart beats when the phone rings. When you can look into someone's eyes and feel content." And I said, "And where is the line? The only thing that's different between my kind of love and what you're talking about is sex. So why is my love only friendly and therefore meaningless to you, even though all those things do happen?" He said, "Do you kiss? Not nice kisses, real kisses." And I said, "I'm not interested in that. Are you saying I have to kiss in order for my love to mean anything serious?" And he said, "Okay, you know what? You will stumble into love someday soon, and you will understand all I'm saying." And I said, "I already do. I understand that you have misled yourself into thinking physicality is necessary for love to be considered more than a childhood friend. Well, you're seriously mistaken. I know of people, and yes, there are guys in that number, who understand my point of view and agree with me." And he said, "Since you haven't experienced it, you have no frame of reference. Talk to me about all of this after you have. You will understand the difference then." And I said, "I'm sorry, you're still wrong. There's no difference between my love and your love. You just have sex with the people you love." And he said, "No." And I said, "Yep. And I'm still with the ones I love, and I can have more than one of them at once without them feeling jealous. Well, maybe a little occasionally if time is unfairly spent." And he says, "When you have an intense love with someone, a romantic love, you'll not even think about anyone else." And I said, "If I can't think about anyone else, that will be a very sad day. You think it's good to forget everyone else and have only one meaningful person? Sad." And he said, Tell me when it happens. It will. It's sad. But when someone has you by your heart, they are all that matters at the time. It's true, hun. I said, wrong again. Tell me when you're actually happy. I am. I wish you would be able to look at this objectively instead of through the lens of programming the society has given you. Do you understand that there are different happinesses, different loves, none of which are better than each other? Do you understand that I am not still untouched by real love? And he said, I wish you could look at it all from a perspective of someone that has actually experienced love. Someone that has invited love in. Not this bullshit friends love. Real love. Girl-guy love. That involves a closeness that you have yet to experience. Quit closing yourself off. You are not a freak. So I sent him a message that says, you're still convinced that I've not had love. You're fooling yourself. I do have girl-guy love. I'm not closed off just because I don't want sex. You're just being ridiculous. If you're positive that one day I'll see the light, then go ahead and worm into your smug little hole. Maybe you'll find something to have sex with in there, to give you the illusion of happiness. Keep in mind that illusions can be pretty realistic. When you can tell me that any love you've had has A, lasted, B, turned out to be what it said it was, and C, did not actively depend on kissing and sex and would still hold together over a long distance over a long period of time, then you can expect me to believe you that you know what you're talking about, but only for yourself. As such, I don't believe you even know how to find love for yourself. So don't do me no favors. I'm already there. And that was the end of that conversation. But I wanted to show you just as a way of framing why I think this person is completely off his nut when it comes to constantly telling me that he knows better than I do what love is. I will read you a short excerpt of an IM we had another time when he was all upset about how some girl had not given him a phone call and therefore the world was ending. So here's what he wrote. He IM'd me one night and wrote, I'm in a world of pain. And I said, you seem to always be. What's wrong this time? He goes, she didn't call me tonight. It really, really bothered me. I'm seriously hurt. I feel like my heart is breaking. And I said, so why didn't you call her? And he said, fear that she wouldn't be home. Then I wouldn't sleep all night wondering where she was. And I said, you should have called her. And if she wasn't home, she could just as easily have been at the grocery store as anywhere else. He says, no. That means she would have been out. I know her. This is so messed up. I feel really hurt. And I said, I'm sorry about that, but I guess I can't do anything to change whatever's wrong. He said, I guess it's true. I have no one to turn to express these feelings. And I said, how about her? You can't just isolate yourself. If you want anything to work out, you have to be honest with yourself and with her instead of acting like she's a different species. If being honest doesn't work, then you'd have to live a lie to be around her, and what good is that? And he said, I don't know anymore. And I said, okay, so is this an ex-girlfriend that you're kind of sort of seeing each other again or not? And he said, I don't know. We hung out Tuesday night. We talked last night, but tonight she hasn't called. If she was going to, she would have already. And I said, did she say she would call? And he said, yeah, but she hasn't. She hates me. Life sucks. I feel like dying. And I said, okay. She didn't call, so your entire world falls apart. What the hell? That is ridiculous. Don't you understand? And he said, I guess from your perspective, but from mine, this is just destroying me. And I said, if she's important to you, you need to let her know that. But if she's important to you, she should be able to be a friend too, and friends talk. Maybe there's a reason she didn't call. And he said, she knows I love her. I do. And I said, it's just a missed phone call. People don't suddenly just hate each other when nothing between them has changed. Oh my God, she didn't call. She hates my guts. I'm going to jump off a bridge. You are overreacting. And he said, who knows? And I said, tomorrow give her a call and ask her what happened to the phone call. Not in an accusing way, but maybe that you were worried about her. And he said, I guess I have to get used to being without her. And I said, why would you have to get used to being without her if you want her in your life? He said, she doesn't want me in her life. And I said, I bet she'd be willing to be in your life if you didn't expect her to be a certain thing for you, like a girlfriend role. You'd still get to have her around. He said, I can't change her mind. And I said, so it's either as a girlfriend or not at all? And he said, I don't want her as a friend. Exactly. My definition of love is different, Swank. And I said, I've noticed, but you seem to think it's the only real love, that your definition is the only right one. Love is wanting someone in your life no matter what role they fill. Love is being able to talk to them, to love them, to eat together, have reciprocal fun together. And just because I've never screwed the people I've loved does not mean I don't know this. He said, when you have physical relationships with people, it's much more complicated. And I said, and that, my friend, it may be why you seem to be losing your loves and going through a lot of hell, while I am not. So, that about wraps that up. And so this one's longer than any other one because YouTube seems to have changed their requirements for how short a video has to be. So I get to ramble longer now. Aren't you people lucky? So that is the end of number 10. I'll see you guys next time.